So as I said then, Owen, he's back in his chair. He's been off at Euro 2012 following England, and now he's back to another sweeping downgrade of Spain's banks.
I think the fact that the Spanish are still in this competition is one of the few bright spots in this country right now, Stuart. I'm not sure whether the banks would agree with me.
True.
And it's the banks that are right back in the eye of the storm of this Eurozone crisis. Just hours after Spain formally applied for a banking bailout with the EU, Moodys announced that it's downgraded 28 of Spain's banks. That's pretty much all of them. Bankia, Banco Santander, some of the big household names in Spain, as well as those smaller regional banks. The story is familiar for anyone who's followed this whole crisis. Moodys is concerned about all those toxic debts that these banks have accumulated over the past 5 years or so, and what they're doing for the balance sheets of these banks. We knew it was coming. Moodys had threatened this downgrade a few months ago. It's also downgraded lots of other global banks, it's worth pointing out. But of course, it all weighs down on this country, which is now, as we know, having to go to the EU for maybe up to 100 billion euros in funding to keep its banks out of trouble.
Well, Spain, in fact, not the only country in downgrade trouble. Cyprus is now the 5th Eurozone country to ask for a bailout. Now, the Mediterranean island has run into trouble through its geographical and financial proximity to Greece. It's now in an uncomfortable position, taking on the EU's rotating presidency while being forced to hand over control of its finances.
A tiny island in a lot of hot water. Cyprus has asked the European Union for a bailout, and quickly, making it the 5th country to ask for emergency funds after Greece, Ireland, Portugal and Spain. Monday's cry for help came right after the rating agency Fitch downgraded the country's credit rating to junk, a move that Standard & Poor's made in January and Moodys in June. Cyprus's sovereign rating went from a BBB- to a BB+, a rating that gives the country a non-investment status. What's behind this negative outlook? Fears for Cyprus's banks and their exposure to toxic Greek debt, an exposure that Cyprus's government also cited in its request for emergency funds. For Fitch, Cypriot banks may need up to 4 billion euros in capital, a sum equal to nearly a quarter of the country's GDP. The country's second largest lender, the Cyprus Popular Bank, needs 1.8 billion euros before Friday. To help CPB, Cyprus may turn once again to Russia to ask for a helping hand. Last year, Moscow gave the island 2.5 billion euros in a bilateral loan. Government officials have also been looking into a loan from China.
Well, as you'd expect, Stuart, all of that fed into the European markets on Monday, with Spain and Italy taking the brunt of the day's losses. On the Asian markets this Tuesday morning, well, bit of a mixed bag. In the last hour or so, the Hang Seng has managed to make 1 or 2 gains, but it's no great shakes. You can see there the Nikkei is still off by around 1%, but has come down off those or come up, I should say, from those early day lows. One market worth having a look at as well, just while we're talking markets, is Egypt, the EGX. Now, Egypt was one of the success stories in the Middle East before the Arab Spring. You can see there its stock market has taken a real hammering over the past year or so in the wake of that revolution. But in the wake of those elections over the weekend, we saw the EGX flying on Monday, finishing the day nearly 8% up. Lots of investors have abandoned Egypt. They pulled out at the time of the revolution. Many of them have yet to return. But if things continue like that, then perhaps Egypt's going to have a brighter future.
Dramatic changes. OK, we're going to pick up on a few of the day's company headlines now. Microsoft has bought out another social networking service. The software giant has paid $1.2 billion, in fact, for Yammer, billed as Twitter for employees within companies. Now, it follows the $8.5 billion acquisition of Skype last year. Since its launch in 2008, Yammer has signed up 5 million users at 200,000 firms worldwide.
Beer maker Anheuser-Busch InBev has confirmed it's in takeover talks with Mexico's Grupo Modelo. Analysts say the deal for the firm behind the Corona brand is worth around $15 billion. It would give an InBev, behind brands like Stella Artois, which already has a 50% stake in Grupo Modelo, better access to a fast-growing Mexican market. Now, inflation in Argentina has fueled a black market for swapping pesos into dollars to try to keep the value of savings for many Argentinians. In fact, the market is now so big that authorities are having to employ sniffer dogs to sniff out bundles of dollars that people try to smuggle across the border out of Argentina. President Cristina Fernandez is trying to stop all that, bringing in a raft of new measures, harsh new measures, many say, to try to keep the peso in Argentina. It's triggered a series of rare protests against a president that was once thought untouchable.
The upmarket area of Recoleta in Buenos Aires resounds to the clanging of saucepans. It's the third time in a week its residents have braved the cold to come out and protest. They're demonstrating against tougher restrictions brought in on exchanging pesos for dollars.
It's about the freedom to do what we want with our money.
At the end of October last year, Cristina Kirchner's government cracked down on the way currencies exchanged, with only tourists or Argentinians going on holiday allowed to buy dollars. Tax inspectors now have to approve any foreign currency purchases. All this to try and hold on to its reserves and pay off the country's national debt. With inflation possibly as high as 25%, it's no surprise many Argentinians had chosen to change their pesos for dollars as a way of holding on to the value of their savings. To show her own confidence in the national currency, the president announced she would be changing her own personal savings from dollars into pesos.
I've decided that I'm going to transfer my savings account into pesos.
But as the economy continues to struggle, the exchange restrictions are only likely to lead to more discontent and more pot banging.
And just before we go, a bit of a familiar but fresh face. This is on Facebook's board.
Facebook has appointed Sheryl Sandberg Stewart to the board. She's the Chief Operating Officer, as you say, somebody who is familiar to the company. She was right by Mark Zuckerberg's side when Facebook floated in mid-May. You can see her there. She is joining the directors at the top table. She's been instrumental in perhaps softening a little bit Mark Zuckerberg's image, schooling him a little bit in how to deal with the media and, crucially, how to deal with those bankers in the run-up to that IPO, where Zuckerberg had been under a bit of pressure from Facebook users, among others, to try and diversify the board a little bit. This is a way, Facebook says, of making the board just that little bit more inclusive.
Yeah, very visible, isn't she? Many investors, of course, got their fingers burned, of course, didn't they, on Facebook's flotation. The US government even thinking that perhaps some lessons need to be learned. Yeah,
there's going to be a congressional hearing today in Washington with an oversight committee that's going to look into this. It's going to look into how small companies float on the stock market. But as a sort of addendum to that, one or two Republican congressmen want to talk about Facebook and the way that IPO was run. Now, of course, we had massive hype for it, and yet Facebook failed to deliver for many investors. It was down nearly 25% at one point. It has recovered its stock market valuation a little bit in the last couple of weeks or so. But a lot of these congressmen want to see if the lessons can be learned. Maybe what they're after really is more disclosure. You might remember that Facebook played a little bit fast and loose with this whole IPO, admitting during this roadshow for its flotation that its revenues weren't going to be quite as spectacular as people thought. Now, that left many investors high and dry because they bought in right at the top of this valuation. It's things like this that this committee wants to talk about. The problem is, of course, with these kind of flotations, there are always winners, there are always losers, and those who win want the losers to keep on losing. So unlikely, I think, that we're going to see any kind of meaningful reform as a result of this committee.
Honest business analysis here on France 24. Owen, good to have you back in the chair. He'll be back just over an hour's time. Claire's got the latest news after the break.